The soft clink of a spoon against a porcelain cup echoed through the silent kitchen, each sound striking straight into my chest. The entire house was suffocatingly quiet, leaving only that sharp, rhythmic tapping and the man sitting across from me, my husband, Richard. Morning light streamed through the window behind him, casting shadows that traced every wrinkle on his face. Every line I once memorized with love, now cracked like an aging wall. Richard wouldn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the cold coffee in his hands, as if hoping it would offer an answer. To be honest, I wish I had never married you. His voice was calm. Too calm. A verdict passed not in anger, not with bitterness, but with the cold finality of 35 years spoken in a single breath. I didn't ask why. That one sentence was enough to shatter every illusion I had fought so hard to protect. There was no need for more. Sat still, hands clenched tightly in my lap, steadying the tremor that wanted to rise. I should have cried, I should have screamed, demanded answers. But all those emotions had been worn down long ago, smoothed away like river stones beneath indifferent water. No words, no sighs. I stood up. Slowly. Steadier than I thought I could be. The wooden stairs creaked softly beneath my feet as I climbed. In our bedroom, everything remained perfectly in place. The bed made with precision, my robe hanging on the door hook, his cufflinks resting in a glass tray. All these traces of a marriage spanning over 3 decades now felt like nothing more than a carefully staged scene. I opened the closet and pulled out an old suitcase. Dust coated its zipper, as if symbolizing how long I had been forgotten here. I wasn't in a hurry. I folded each piece of clothing deliberately, not because I intended to return, but out of respect for the memories that had once been beautiful. I had loved that man. I had truly believed we were a team, 2 halves balancing each other. What took me the longest was deciding on the worn, brown leather journal. Inside were all the things I never dared to say aloud. Sleepless nights, careless words that left scars, moments of being overlooked while smiling through the pain. Every page was a wound I had quietly tended to, with patience and grace. I held the journal for a moment, then gently placed it in the drawer of my nightstand, returning it to where it belonged. Downstairs, Richard remained seated, still staring into nothing. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't try to stop me. No regret, no pleading. Perhaps, for him, that confession was a release, for both of us. I picked up my keys, opened the door, and stepped outside. The early sunlight stretched across the brick path, the world around me peaceful to the point of cruelty. Life didn't stop, only I had just lost a piece of my past. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. I walked away, taking only what was truly mine, leaving behind a life that had become an empty shell. Each step echoed against the bricks, firm but not hurried. I wasn't running. I was simply stepping out of a story I had forced myself to continue writing for far too long. Today, I didn't need anyone's permission to leave. Today, I chose myself and walked away without looking back. The day I first met Richard, I was 23, freshly graduated with a degree in education and a heart full of dreams. Back then, I imagined myself as a high school literature teacher, inspiring kids in a small Boston suburb, the place where I was born, where life was simple and safe. Richard was 4 years older, the first man who ever made me feel truly safe. He worked for a small construction company inherited from his uncle. He wasn't flashy, but he was solid, much like the man himself. The first time he asked me out, I thought he was just being polite. But when he stood in the rain after my shift, holding out an umbrella without a word, I knew. If this man ever proposed, I would say yes. And I did. We married when I turned 25. It was a simple backyard wedding at my mother's house. I wore her old wedding dress. Richard didn't make grand speeches, but the way he looked at me that day, it was enough to believe he would stay by my side forever. In the beginning, Richard was the husband everyone wished for. He'd get up early to make tea, always dropping in a thin slice of lemon because he knew my throat was sensitive. On weekends he'd take me on quiet walks along the Charles River, often surprising me with a single tulip, because, as he once said, Ella prefers simple things over grand bouquets. When I became pregnant with our first child, Alex, I told Richard I wanted to keep teaching after the baby was born. But life had other plans. One evening, as I sat rubbing my belly, feeling tiny kicks beneath my skin, Richard took my hand and said, "You can stay home to care for our child. I'll take care of both of you." His words weren't a command, they were a promise. And I believed him. I left my job. Temporarily, I told myself. But that temporarily stretched into 10 long years. After Alex came Lily, and soon our small house was always filled with the sounds of children. I gradually let go of my dream of standing in front of a classroom because every day of mine now began with making breakfast for the kids, doing laundry, cleaning up, and long evenings waiting for Richard to come home late. I didn't see it as suffering, on the contrary. Back then I was proud that I kept our family running smoothly. Richard remained hardworking. He never forgot to bring back small gifts after business trips. A silver bracelet, a cookbook, even a postcard once with a brief line, "I know you'd love the sunset here." But those gifts became fewer. Just like the moments he truly looked at me and asked, "How are you doing?" Instead, phone calls home grew rushed, family dinners became rare. Richard spent more time on his phone, immersed in contracts, endless meetings. He was still the calm man I knew, never raised his voice, never harsh, but his silence? That was the sharpest blade. I used to believe every long marriage would turn out this way. Less romance, more responsibility, no more evenings holding hands watching movies, no more spontaneous kisses in the kitchen. But in return there would be stability, the quiet safety of having each other. I was wrong. The silence between us wasn't peace, it was emptiness. I started to realize I was living in a house where everything functioned perfectly, except for the marriage itself. There were evenings I sat by the window, staring at the empty street outside, waiting for Richard to come home just to hear him ask, "How was your day, Ella?" But he would walk past me as if I were a piece of furniture, as if my being there was simply a given, requiring no attention. Lily grew older, Alex went off to college. I thought once the kids grew up, Richard and I would return to those slow, easy mornings together, take small trips like we used to. But Richard never mentioned such plans. Our future together was a topic that simply never came up. I kept the house clean, cooked dinners filled with his favorite dishes, only to see them grow cold on the table when he texted, "Working late tonight." No apology, not even a hint of guilt. Yet I kept holding everything together, pretending nothing had changed. I told myself, that's what a woman should do, keep the home warm, preserve the little things her husband no longer noticed. But I had forgotten to ask myself, who was going to keep me? It was during those long lonely nights that I began to write. Not letters to send, but entries in a journal meant only for myself. Each page was an admission of my solitude. No one else heard, but at least I was finally listening to myself. I never imagined there would come a day when I would leave. But when Richard said those words this morning, "I wish I had never married you," I knew the part of me that belonged in this marriage had died a long time ago. I had simply just now accepted it. I can't even remember the last time Richard asked me what I wanted for breakfast. Maybe 3 years ago, maybe longer. Or maybe he never really did and I had simply clung to a comforting illusion of the man he used to be. Last winter, on my birthday, the kitchen lights were on early. Not because someone was planning a surprise for me. No, as always, it was me. Baking an apple pie, brewing coffee, setting the table just right. I told myself it didn't matter. As long as we had breakfast together, that would be enough. By 8 o'clock, only Lily had come downstairs, her eyes glued to her phone, earbuds in, mumbling, "Mom, why are you up so early? Is today something special?" I stood there silently, still holding a slice of pie. Smiling, though it felt like someone had just driven a cold needle straight into my chest. Richard came down later. Same gray suit, same routine of adjusting his tie in the mirror. But this time he didn't even glance at the pie I had placed in the middle of the table. "I need to get to the site early. Don't wait for me for breakfast." His words drifted out casually and he left, the door slamming harder than any birthday greeting I had hoped for. I sat down, cut a piece of pie, and chewed slowly, as if eating my own patience. I didn't cry, but I couldn't pretend not to feel anything either. The signs of my disappearance began with small things like that. Questions no longer asked. Shared routines replaced by his own schedule. One evening, I told him about an art class I wanted to take. Richard just murmured an uh-huh, eyes still locked on his laptop screen, not even asking a single follow-up question. Lily grew up to be so much like her father. She adored him, something I never denied. But as the years passed, an invisible wall rose between mother and daughter. Perhaps because I no longer had a job, couldn't tell stories about million-dollar deals or glamorous business trips. My stories, about the kitchen, the garden, to Lily, they were nothing more than background noise. One evening, during a rare family dinner where everyone was present, Lily excitedly shared about a new project at her company. I nodded, ready to ask more about her plans when Richard interrupted. "Your mom probably only understands strawberry jam these days, Lily. Try not to use complicated terms." It sounded like a joke, but it landed on the table like a heavy stone. Lily laughed and added without a second thought, "Well, it makes sense. Finance isn't really for someone who spends her days baking and arranging flowers." I smiled, as if I too found it funny. But inside, a small piece of me cracked. I began to realize I was no longer Richard's partner. I was the woman who kept the kitchen warm, who reminded him to take a raincoat on stormy days, who stood quietly behind him at parties smiling as expected. But real conversations, genuine glances shared between us, those had disappeared long ago. That night, as I washed dishes under warm water, I caught my reflection in the window glass. A woman with a faint smile, her back slightly hunched, as if she had grown used to shrinking herself, to fit into a space she once believed was home. I used to think if I tried hard enough, stayed gentle, stayed patient, Richard would look at me the way he once did. But the more patient I became, the more invisible I became. Even I had started to forget who I used to be. Lately, Lily barely called. Quick, curt messages. "Are you okay, Mom?" And before I could even type a reply, another message would appear. "Sorry, in a meeting now." Richard continued his late nights. The reasons were always the same. Projects, partners, work. I stopped asking. Not because I believed him, but because I was too exhausted to hear another hollow explanation. One time, I happened to check our joint credit card transactions. Lavish dinners at restaurants I had never been invited to. Hotel bills charged right after office hours. I thought about confronting him. But then, I stayed silent. Not out of fear, but because I knew the cruelest truth wasn't that he had been unfaithful. It was that he no longer bothered to hide it. I wasn't even worth deceiving anymore. I was merely a shadow in the very home I had helped build. That night, I sat in my study, once filled with lesson plans and student notebooks, now only holding dried flowers and old photographs. I opened my journal, and for the first time in years, I didn't write about Richard. I didn't write about Lily. I didn't write about family. I wrote about me. About the Ella in her 20s, who once dreamed of traveling across America with just a backpack and canvas shoes. Who dreamed of opening a little bookstore by the beach, where people wouldn't rush to buy, but would come to slow down. I had forgotten about her for far too long. That fateful brunch happened on a soft May Sunday, when Boston's weather was unusually gentle. I woke up early, setting the table out on the porch with a cream-colored cloth arranging pale pink tulips, the kind Richard once said reminded him of my smile. The last time he said that, Lily hadn't even learned to walk. That day I prepared everything carefully. Mushroom quiche, mango avocado salad, fresh squeezed orange juice. Alex had said he'd stop by with his new girlfriend, and Lily had reluctantly confirmed she would try to swing by. I thought, surely, this would be a chance for the family to come together. A beautiful day, a table full of food. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Alex arrived early, still the only kind soul left in this family. He wrapped me in a hug, whispering, "You're still the best cook, Mom." His words nearly brought me to tears. Lily arrived nearly 30 minutes late, her face cold as ice, a takeout coffee in hand, as if she were stopping by a familiar cafe, not her own home. Richard, of course. Only showed up after I had finished setting the table. Sleeves rolled up, phone never leaving his hand. We sat down, the conversation revolved around Lily and her new job. A prestigious finance corporation, million-dollar deals, business trips to Europe. She spoke with pride. I listened, nodded, occasionally asking a few questions, but every time I tried to speak, Richard had a way of cutting me off. Media strategy? You know, Ella, they use data for everything now. No need for emotional touches like when you used to teach. Lily laughed, glancing at me with a smirk. Mom probably just needs to worry about what flowers to plant next, right? Laughter rippled across the table, light as air but sharp as a blade. I sat there, among my own family, feeling like an outsider. Alex stayed quiet. He turned to me, about to say something, but I smiled first. Yes, I've been quite busy with my little garden. I smiled as if I had practiced that line 100 times. But inside, something cracked wide open. After the meal, I quietly cleaned up. No one offered to help, no one asked me to sit and chat. They left, leaving behind an empty table and shards of my self-worth scattered in the silence. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the old armchair in the living room, the warm light casting soft shadows on the family photos lining the walls. In every picture, I stood there, always one step behind Richard, always smiling right on cue. I realized I had stopped existing as an independent person without even noticing when it happened. The next morning I called Marlene. Arlene had been my best friend since college. She now lived alone in Salem, just over a 30-minute drive from Boston. We kept in touch, though not as often as before. But unlike everyone else, Marlene always asked me one very real question. Ella, who are you living for? When I told her I wanted to stay over for a few days, Marlene didn't ask why. She simply said, my door is always open, and you don't need to bring anything except yourself. I hung up, opened the closet, and reached for my smallest suitcase. This wasn't an impulsive decision. It wasn't the heat of anger. It was the result of thousands of tiny cuts. From cold dinners to careless words, from indifferent glances to years of silence. I left a small note on the kitchen table. Not a goodbye letter, just 2 simple sentences. I'm going to find Ella again. If anyone cares, you can start by remembering when my birthday is. Marlene's apartment was small but warm. There were no expensive sofas, no showy book displays. But everything in that space breathed the life of someone who lived true to herself. That first night I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Not searching for wrinkles, not measuring age. I just wanted to look straight at the woman in the reflection. The woman I had forgotten for decades. The Ella of long ago used to love reading poetry by the window, dreamed of learning to paint, imagined solo trips to faraway places. But through the years I had quietly turned myself into a shadow, serving everyone else, even myself. I don't think you're weak, Ella. Marlena placed her hand on my shoulder. Her gaze was not pitying, only deeply understanding. You just forgot that you deserve to be heard too. That night, I opened my journal, its first page blank after so many years. But this time, I didn't write about Richard. I didn't write about Lily. There were no complaints, no bitterness. I wrote about me. I am Ella, and starting tomorrow I will learn to treat this woman with the kindness she has always given the world. I set the pen down and sighed. But it wasn't a sigh of resignation. It was the breath of someone who had just cut through an invisible rope that had bound her for 35 years. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least this time I would be the one choosing each step for my life. Marlene's little apartment soon became a safe space for me. No more slamming doors. No more Richard's indifferent stares or Lily's cutting remarks. Just the morning birds. The rich aroma of coffee and a stillness quiet enough to finally hear myself. 3 days after leaving home, I did something I hadn't done in 35 years. I opened a bank account under my own name. The young clerk smiled and asked if I wanted a debit card with my name printed on it. I nearly cried when I saw Ella Hartman appear on the confirmation screen. A name, so familiar, yet for so long no longer tied to any real choice. When was the last time I signed a financial contract on my own? Probably when I bought my silver used car before marrying Richard. Since then, everything had been under the label of someone's wife. Walking out of the bank, the June sunlight bathed the sidewalks of Salem, soft as a greeting. I held the new card tightly in my pocket, feeling like I had just taken another step toward freedom. Marlene looked at me with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Think it's time you visited an old friend." I was puzzled at first but then laughed when I realized she was talking about the old cabin by Harmony Lake, where I used to spend summers with my parents. That cabin had almost slipped from my memory after they passed. Richard once said it wasn't worth investing in, so I let it fade into the background. But legal papers don't forget. That little house still bore my name. A week later, I drove Marlene's old car back to Harmony. The cabin appeared through the tall pines, its roof blanketed in green moss, wooden steps weathered but still sturdy. It wasn't a luxurious home, but to me it was the last piece of earth that was truly mine. I spent 2 days cleaning every cobweb pulled down, every window scrubbed until it gleamed. At times I paused, breathless, my back drenched in sweat. But the feeling was different. Tiring but liberating. That first evening in the cabin, I baked an apple pie, using my mother's old recipe. Not to serve anyone. Not out of wifely duty. But simply because I loved the way cinnamon filled the kitchen air. When the crust turned golden, I brewed a cup of peppermint tea, sat on the porch, and watched the stillness of the lake. For the first time in years, I ate something I had made without waiting for anyone's approval. And it was truly delicious. I started journaling again, but no longer about Richard's neglect or Lily's indifference. Instead, I wrote down things I wanted to try. Painting, planting lavender, building a small bookshelf with my own hands. Day 1. Buy watercolor paints. They don't have to be fancy, just enough to get started. Day 3. Research how to grow herbs in the backyard. It would be lovely to pick fresh mint leaves for tea every morning. I had never found myself so interesting. Every morning I took walks along the lake, listening to the crunch of gravel beneath my feet, filling my lungs with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sometimes I would stop and stare at the wildflowers by the roadside, just to admire them, with no purpose at all. In those slow, quiet moments, I felt my own existence more clearly than ever. One afternoon I stood in a small stationery shop downtown, my fingers brushing over boxes of watercolor paints and notebooks with simple hardback covers. The shop owner, a woman in her 40s with a warm smile, approached me. "First time trying to paint? Don't worry. Art isn't meant to please others. It's for you to see yourself." Her words struck me like a gentle awakening. That evening I sat at a small wooden table, soft yellow light casting a glow on the blank paper. My first brushstrokes were shaky, clumsy, but with each wash of color spreading across the page, I felt my heart soften a little. It wasn't a masterpiece. It wasn't meant to be displayed. It was simply me, living honestly with myself. I started baking more, not for compliments but because the smell of fresh bread made the cabin feel warm. I tried planting a few pots of herbs in the yard, failed, then planted again. I no longer felt ashamed of not knowing things. Instead, every failure made me smile. One more thing to learn. Gradually, my journal stopped being a vessel for pain. It became a collection of small plans, dreams my 23-year-old self once cherished, but had buried under layers of duty. Day 12. Try cycling around the lake. No one's going to laugh. Day 15. Sign up for a weekend pottery class. Each line felt like a step leading me back to myself. I don't know when Richard found the journal. Maybe it was in the old study where I used to sit each night, scribbling down thoughts no one ever cared to ask about. I hadn't meant to leave it behind. But I hadn't tried to hide it either. Because eventually, the truth always finds a way to speak. Marlene was the first to tell me. "Ella," he called me. Richard's voice, it was strange, not angry, not cold like I used to hear. He said, "I didn't realize how blind I've been." I only smiled, a smile no longer bitter but peaceful. The kind of peace that comes from putting down a burden for the very last time. 3 days later, a package arrived at the cabin. Inside was a thick envelope and a handwritten letter in Richard's familiar firm script. Precise and rigid, just like he used to be. You were right. Not just once, but for 35 years. You've been speaking through your eyes, through your silence, through every hot meal that went cold. And I didn't listen. I paused, my chest tightening as I read the next lines. I've read everything you wrote. With each page I turned, I felt myself shrink, becoming more cowardly than I ever imagined. I turned the only woman who chose me into someone invisible, right in the very home you built, piece by piece. Not because I hated you, but because I was afraid to face the kindness I didn't deserve. Today, I signed over everything to you. The house, our joint savings, all of it. Not out of guilt, but because for the first time in my life I realized I never truly owned anything that mattered. You're the only one who deserves to decide your own future. If this brings you even a little peace, then perhaps this is the first right thing I've done as a husband. I folded the letter slowly, my fingers brushing the paper's edge as if touching the past. No more resentment. No more expectations. Just a quiet acknowledgement that a long chapter had finally closed. That afternoon, Lily called me. For the first time in months, her voice wasn't sharp or cold. It was hesitant, fragile. A stark contrast to the confident, polished daughter Richard always bragged about. Mom. I read what Dad sent. That was your journal, wasn't it? I stayed silent. I really had no idea how you felt all those years. I thought you were always fine. Because you never got angry, never complained, I mistook your silence for acceptance. I heard a long sigh on the other end of the line. The kind of sigh from someone realizing they've missed something far too important. I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for the harsh words, but for forgetting that you're also a woman, not just someone's mother. I closed my eyes, letting the old hurt wash over me like gentle waves. Lily, I never hated you. But from now on, I won't live for your approval. Or anyone's. If you want to know who I am, you'll have to see me as a person, not as the one who keeps the kitchen running. He was quiet for a moment, then softly said, Will you teach me how to do that? I didn't answer right away. But deep down I had known my answer for a long time. That afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows through the pine trees, my phone rang again. This time it was Alex. Mom. Dad called me the other day. I've never seen him so vulnerable. He told me about you, about the things he never noticed, never did, never understood. I figured if Dad has the courage to face his mistakes, then I should too. Alex didn't cry, but his voice trembled. I'm sorry for being so caught up in my own life, forgetting you're still here, waiting to be heard. I promise I won't just ask how are you out of habit anymore. I really want to know how you're living, Mom. I leaned against the window frame, sunset light painting my hands in amber. Strangely, I felt light. Not because they finally realized I mattered, but because, at last, I didn't need them to validate my worth. The ripple effects weren't loud. Not dramatic, but deep enough to make everyone involved stop and reflect. I had waited for these words for years. And yet, when they came, I felt an unexpected calm. I didn't reply to Richard's letter. Not out of spite. Not to hurt him. I simply realized some answers don't need to be spoken. And my silence this time wasn't resignation, it was a clear, intentional closure. The cabin by Harmony Lake had quietly become my real home. Not a place to hide from the past, but a place I chose to begin again. I enrolled in a beginner's painting class at the community center. The first session had only 6 of us, mostly middle-aged women who, like me, had once lost themselves in titles and duties. We sat around worn easels, hands trembling but with eyes sparkling with something I thought I had lost: excitement. I taught them what little I knew, but what I received was far greater than any technique. Honest sharing. A sense of connection I hadn't felt in years. In the afternoons, I worked in the garden. Hands once accustomed to scrubbing and cooking, now learning the gentle rhythm of tending soil. Lavender, basil, wild daisies. Each sprouting bud felt like a quiet affirmation that no matter how life uproots us, there are always beautiful things waiting to bloom again. Lily visited after 3 months. She didn't come with any grand reason. She simply wanted to sit with me on the porch, sip tea, and talk about little things. For the first time in years, I saw her truly look at me, not as a mother bound to chores, but as a woman she was learning to understand. "You know, Mom, I used to think success meant being better than others," Lily said, her voice softer. "But now I realize, maybe real success is knowing what you're living for." I just smiled and handed her a cup of tea. No long lectures. No need to cling to the image of the perfect mother. We sat quietly, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold, letting peace speak louder than any rehearsed words. Alex called me more often now. Not rushed check-ins, but real conversations. About work, books he was reading, even his own relationship doubts. I was no longer just the one worrying over his meals. I was a friend, a listener. And that made our bond deeper than ever. Richard? He still lived in the old house. I'd heard he was learning to cook, doing his own laundry, rediscovering habits once deemed a wife's job. Alex mentioned once he saw his father standing lost in front of the bookshelf, the one that used to hold my beloved novels, holding an old photo in his hand. I don't know what Richard was thinking. And honestly, I don't need to know anymore. Forgiveness was never something I handed out easily. But resentment no longer had a place in me. I simply accepted. Accepted that some people will never change. Accepted that some losses don't need to be reclaimed. Accepted that happiness doesn't come from being chosen by others, but from choosing myself every single day. Late in the afternoon, as golden sunlight poured over my small garden, I stood among the lavender, my hands dirty, my heart light. I had spent too long keeping the fire burning for others, forgetting that I too deserved warmth. Now that fire was in my hands, and I chose to light it on my own terms. No longer Richard's shadow. No longer the mother scrambling to meet Lily's expectations. No longer the woman silently enduring to keep up the illusion of a perfect family. That evening, I sat on the cabin porch, a new journal open on my lap. Not to write about old sorrows, but to record a simple truth. I don't need anyone to choose me. I have chosen myself. And that is the best thing I've ever done. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the sweet scent of lavender. I felt at peace. Not hoping, just at peace. Ella's story is not just about leaving a cold marriage. It's a powerful reminder of the value of living true to oneself. In today's world, many women quietly sacrifice, forgetting that happiness doesn't come from pleasing others. Only when we dare to let go of invisible chains do we truly find ourselves again. Ella's quiet journey speaks for all of us. The right to choose happiness always belongs in our own hands. What do you think about Ella's journey? Have you ever seen yourself in this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more meaningful stories about life, family, and self-worth.